Fred and Rosemary West were a married couple from England whose partnership became infamous due to a series of sadistic and brutal killings they committed from the late 1960s through the 1980s. The two first met in 1969 at a bus stop in Cheltenham when Rosemary was just 15 years old and Fred was 27. Rosemary came from a background of poverty and alleged abuse, while Fred had already been on a violent criminal path, including theft and suspected involvement in past killings. Despite Fred being in and out of prison and already having children from a previous relationship, Rosemary moved in with him and began helping raise his children. Their relationship quickly turned abusive and controlling, yet the two grew increasingly attached and shared disturbing sexual desires. Their descent into serial killing began not long after they started living together. Their first known victim was likely Fred's stepdaughter Charmaine, who disappeared in 1971 while Fred was in prison, with many believing Rosemary killed her. Around the same time, Fred's first wife, Rena Costello, also vanished. The couple's first confirmed joint killing was of Linda Go in 1973, a young woman who lived with them briefly before being forced into non-consensual sex, being tortured, killed, and buried in their basement. From that point on, Fred and Rosemary lured vulnerable young women, many of which were often runaways, into their home. They would subject them to prolonged sexual abuse and torture, then ultimately killing them and burying their bodies on their property. Their methods grew more organized and sadistic over time, involving restraints, gags, and extensive physical abuse. Fred often took the lead in the killings, but Rosemary was a willing and active participant, sometimes acting independently. Their crimes went undetected for years due to a lack of thorough police investigation. It wasn't until 1994 when their daughter Heather was reported missing, and rumors circulated that Fred had joked about burying her under the patio, that police began searching their home. What they uncovered shocked the country, with many bodies buried under floors and in the garden, including Heather's. Fred was arrested and charged with multiple counts of killing, but took his own life in his prison cell in 1995 before he could stand trial. Rosemary stood trial later that year, was found guilty of 10 killings, and received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. She remains in prison to this day. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka met in October 1987 at a hotel restaurant in Scarborough, Ontario, when she was just 17 and he was 23. Their relationship quickly became twisted, with Bernardo introducing Homolka to his violent sexual fantasies and sadistic behaviors. The situation worsened as both individuals shared disturbing psychological tendencies that would eventually manifest in horrific crimes. Their descent into killing began with the death of Homolka's younger sister, Tammy, in December 1990. The couple had been sexually assaulting the 15-year-old girl using drugs that Homolka, who worked as a veterinary assistant, had stolen from her workplace. During one of these assaults, Tammy choked on her own vomit and died. While officially ruled an accident, this incident marked the beginning of their killing spree. Their methods became more calculated and predatory as they progressed. Bernardo and Homolka would target young women, often teenagers, whom they would abduct, sexually assault, torture, and ultimately kill. They documented their crimes extensively with video recordings, demonstrating a level of premeditation and sadism. Their victims included 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey in June 1991 and 15-year-old Kristen French in April 1992. The couple would keep their victims captive for days, subjecting them to prolonged torture before ending their lives. The investigation intensified when Bernardo was identified through DNA evidence as the perpetrator of numerous sexual assaults in the Scarborough area, where he had been active as a serial predator since the mid-1980s. The breakthrough came when Homolka, following years of physical abuse from Bernardo, contacted police in 1993 and agreed to testify against him in exchange for a plea deal. She received a controversial 12-year sentence for manslaughter, while Bernardo was convicted of first-degree charges and sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole for 25 years. The case became one of Canada's most notorious criminal investigations, particularly due to the plea bargain Homolka received before the full extent of her involvement was revealed through the videotapes. Bernardo remains incarcerated and has been denied parole multiple times, while Homolka was released in 2005 after serving her full sentence. Ian Brady and Myra Hindley first met in January 1961 when they both worked at Millward's Merchandising Company in Manchester, England. Brady was 23 and had already developed an obsession with Nazi ideology and violent literature, while Hindley was 18 and initially appeared to be an ordinary young woman. Brady gradually introduced Hindley to his philosophies and violent fantasies, transforming her from a conventional secretary into his willing accomplice. Their relationship became increasingly centered around Brady's sadistic interests and his desire to commit what he considered the perfect crime. Their killing spree began in July 1963 with the death of 16-year-old Pauline Reed, whom they lured from a local dance. Brady and Hindley developed a method of targeting children and teenagers, often approaching them under the pretense of offering help or asking for assistance. Hindley's role was particularly important because her presence made potential victims feel safer and more likely to cooperate. They would drive their victims to the remote Saddleworth Moor area, where Brady would sexually assault and kill them before burying the bodies in shallow graves. The couple killed at least 4 more victims over the next 2 years: 12-year-old John Kilbride, 12-year-old Keith Bennett, 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, and 17-year-old Edward Evans. Their methods remained consistent throughout, involving deception to gain trust, followed by abduction to the moors. They documented some of their crimes with photographs and audio recordings, including disturbing recordings of Leslie Ann Downey pleading for her life. The couple seemed to take pleasure in these recordings and would revisit them repeatedly. Their downfall came in October 1965 when they attempted to involve Hindley's brother-in-law, David Smith, in their activities. During a visit to their home, Smith witnessed Brady attacking Edward Evans with an axe and was horrified by what he saw. Despite Brady and Hindley's attempts to convince him to help dispose of the body, Smith contacted police the following day, leading to their arrest. Both Brady and Hindley were convicted in 1966 and sentenced to life imprisonment. Brady was found guilty of 3 counts, while Hindley was convicted of 2 counts, plus being an accessory in a 3rd case. Brady died in prison in 2017 at age 79, having spent over 50 years incarcerated. Hindley died in prison in 2002 at age 60, despite multiple attempts to secure parole. The case became known as the Moors Killings and remains one of Britain's most notorious criminal cases. David and Catherine Burney first met as teenagers in the 1960s in Perth, Western Australia. They began a relationship that involved criminal activity from early on, with both engaging in petty theft and other minor offenses together. After spending time apart, during which they both married other people and had children, they reconnected in the early 1980s. Their reunion reignited their criminal partnership, but this time, their activities would escalate far beyond simple theft into something much more dangerous. The Burney's killing spree began in October 1986 and lasted just 5 weeks, during which they killed 4 women. Their method was relatively consistent throughout this period. They would drive around Perth, looking for young women who were alone and vulnerable. David would approach potential victims under various pretenses, often offering help or a ride, while Catherine would remain in the car to make the situation appear less threatening. Once they had lured their victims into the vehicle, they would take them back to their home in Morehouse Street, Willagee. At their house, the couple would chain their victims in the bedroom and subject them to prolonged sexual assault and torture. Catherine played an active role in these crimes, not merely as an accomplice, but as a willing participant who seemed to derive satisfaction from the victim's suffering. Their victims included 22-year-old Mary Nielsen, 15-year-old Susanna Candy, 31-year-old Nolene Patterson, and 21-year-old Denise Brown. After keeping their victims captive for varying periods, David would kill them, often by strangulation, before the couple would dispose of the bodies in remote locations around Perth. Their crimes came to an end in November 1986, when their 5th intended victim, 17-year-old Kate Moyer, managed to escape from their house. Moyer had been chained and assaulted like the others, but when Catherine briefly left her alone with David, she convinced him to remove her restraints by promising cooperation. She then fled the house and flagged down a passing motorist, leading to the couple's immediate arrest. Both David and Catherine Burney were convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. David was found guilty of 4 counts of willful killing, while Catherine was convicted as an accessory to the same crimes. David took his own life in prison in 2005, while Catherine remains incarcerated. Gerald and Charlene Gallego met in 1977 when she was working as a cocktail waitress in Sacramento, California. Charlene, who came from a wealthy family and had attended college, was initially attracted to Gerald's criminal lifestyle and rebellious nature. Gerald had already been married multiple times and had a lengthy criminal record, including various violent offenses. Despite their different backgrounds, they quickly formed a relationship built around Gerald's increasingly violent sexual fantasies, which Charlene initially found exciting rather than alarming. Their killing spree began in September 1978 and continued intermittently until 1980, claiming the lives of 10 people across California and Nevada. Gerald's obsession was finding what he called perfect sex slaves, young women who would be completely submissive to his desires. Charlene played a crucial role in their method, as her respectable appearance and friendly demeanor made potential victims feel safe. She would typically approach young women or couples at shopping malls, bars, or other public places, often asking for help with directions or offering them drugs or a ride. Once victims were in their van, Gerald would flash a gun and force them to a remote location, usually in rural areas of California or Nevada. The couple would keep their victims for varying periods, during which Gerald would sexually assault them while Charlene watched or participated. Their victims included teenagers Kippy Vaught and Rhonda Scheffler, college students Brenda Judd and Sandra Colley, and several others ranging in age from 13 to 22. Gerald would eventually kill the victims, typically by shooting or beating them, before disposing of their bodies in isolated areas. Their crimes began to unravel when they were stopped for a routine traffic violation in November 1980 while transporting 2 teenage victims. The girls managed to identify themselves to police, leading to the couple's arrest. Initially, investigators weren't aware of the full extent of their crimes, but as evidence mounted and bodies were discovered, the extent of their killing spree became clear. Gerald was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection in Nevada in 2002. Charlene negotiated a plea deal in exchange for her testimony against Gerald, receiving a sentence of 16 years and 8 months. She was released from prison in 1997 after serving her sentence. Though her cooperation with authorities and relatively light punishment compared to Gerald's death sentence generated significant controversy, Ray and Faye Copeland met in the 1940s in rural Missouri and married in 1949. Ray had already established himself as a small-time criminal involved in cattle rustling and various fraud schemes. While Faye came from a poor farming family, they settled into life as farmers in Mooresville, Missouri, where Ray continued his pattern of illegal activities to supplement their income. Over the decades, Ray's criminal behavior escalated from simple theft and fraud to more elaborate schemes involving the exploitation of workers who came to their farm seeking employment. Their killing spree began in the late 1980s, though the exact timeline remains unclear due to the rural and isolated nature of their crimes. Ray developed a method that took advantage of homeless men who would respond to his job advertisements for farm work. He would hire these men, many of whom had criminal backgrounds or substance abuse problems, to help him with cattle buying schemes. Ray would take these workers to livestock auctions where they would write bad checks to purchase cattle using fake identities. Once the cattle were sold for cash, Ray would eliminate the evidence by killing the men he had used in the scheme. Faye's role initially appeared to be that of a passive participant, but investigation revealed she was more involved than she claimed, helping to dispose of evidence and maintaining the farm while Ray carried out the killings. The couple would bury the bodies on their property or dispose of them in remote locations around their farm. Their crimes were discovered in 1989 when authorities investigating missing persons cases connected several disappearances to the Copeland farm. A search of their property revealed multiple human remains buried around the farm, along with personal belongings of the victims. Investigators found evidence of at least 5 killings, though they suspected there may have been more victims whose remains were never found. Both Ray and Faye Copeland were convicted and initially sentenced to death, making Faye the oldest woman on death row at age 69. Ray died of natural causes in prison in 1993 while awaiting execution. Faye's sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment due to her age and questions about her mental competency. She died in prison in 2003 at age 82. Douglas Clark and Carol Bundy met in 1980 at a country and western bar in North Hollywood, California. Clark was a factory worker and part-time security guard with a history of sexual offenses, while Bundy was a licensed vocational nurse who had struggled with mental health issues and unstable relationships throughout her life. Despite their different backgrounds, they quickly formed a sexual relationship centered around Clark's violent fantasies. Bundy, who was emotionally vulnerable and desperate for acceptance, became willing to participate in increasingly dangerous activities to maintain Clark's interest and approval. Their killing spree began in June 1980 and lasted until August of the same year, claiming the lives of at least 6 people in the Los Angeles area. Clark was obsessed with killing young women during sexual encounters, and he began targeting prostitutes and runaways in Hollywood. His method typically involved picking up victims in his car, driving them to secluded locations, and then shooting them during or after sexual activity. Clark seemed to derive particular satisfaction from the power and control aspects of these crimes, often keeping personal items from his victims as trophies. Bundy's role evolved from passive accomplice to active participant as their relationship progressed. Initially, she helped Clark by providing him with a gun and assisting with disposal of evidence. However, her involvement escalated when she killed Jack Murray, a former lover who had become suspicious of her relationship with Clark and threatened to expose them. Bundy lured Murray to a van where she shot and decapitated him, later disposing of his head in a canyon. The couple's downfall began when Bundy started bragging about their crimes to co-workers and acquaintances, apparently unable to contain her excitement about their activities. Her erratic behavior and inappropriate comments about the ongoing investigation into the Hollywood killings drew attention from law enforcement. In August 1980, Bundy was arrested after she confessed details of the crimes to a friend who contacted police. Both Clark and Bundy were convicted of multiple counts of first-degree cases. Clark was sentenced to death and remains on death row in California, while Bundy received a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Bundy died in prison in 2003 at age 61. The case became known as the Sunset Strip Killings. Alvin and Judith Neely met in 1979 when she was just 15 years old and he was 26. Judith had run away from home and was living on the streets when Alvin, who had already spent time in prison for various crimes, took her in. Their relationship began as a typical predatory situation where an older criminal exploited a vulnerable teenager, but it quickly developed into something more complex. Alvin married Judith when she turned 16, and he began training her in criminal activities while simultaneously subjecting her to physical and psychological abuse. Their killing spree occurred over a brief but intense period in 1982, during which they killed at least 3 people across Georgia and Alabama. Alvin's method involved targeting young people who appeared vulnerable or isolated, often approaching them under the pretense of offering help or assistance. The couple would work together to gain their victims' trust, with Judith often playing the role of a friendly peer who could relate to other young people. Once they had isolated their victims, Alvin would reveal his true intentions and take control of the situation. Their crimes escalated quickly in both brutality and planning. They killed 13-year-old Lisa Ann Milliken, who they abducted from a mall, and later killed a young couple, Janice Chapman and John Hancock. Their methods became increasingly sadistic, involving prolonged torture and sexual assault before the final killing. Alvin appeared to direct most of the violence, while Judith participated as both witness and accomplice. The couple seemed to feed off each other's presence during these crimes, with Alvin's control over Judith extending to making her participate in activities that she later claimed she found repulsive. Their capture came after a failed attempt to abduct another victim, led to increased police attention and investigation. Witnesses were able to provide descriptions of their vehicle, and the couple was arrested in September 1982. During the investigation, evidence emerged that painted a picture of Alvin as the dominant partner who had systematically corrupted and controlled Judith from the time she was a teenager. Alvin was sentenced to death, but died of cancer in prison in 2005 before his execution could be carried out. Judith was also initially sentenced to death, making her the youngest woman on death row at age 18. However, her sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment, and she was eventually released on parole in 2024 after serving over 40 years in prison. Michel and Monique Olivier's story began in the early 1980s through an exchange of letters. While Fourniret was imprisoned for sexual assault, Olivier, recently divorced and emotionally vulnerable, found herself responding to a personal advertisement from this incarcerated man. What started as written communication between strangers evolved into a relationship built on shared resentment. Olivier, seeking escape from her troubled past, became drawn into Fourniret's twisted worldview, where he promised her a sense of power and purpose she had never experienced. The progression into violence wasn't immediate, but developed over several years after Fourniret's release and their marriage. Beginning in 1987, they embarked on a 16-year period of targeting young women and teenage girls across France and Belgium. Fourniret harbored an obsession with what he considered purity, specifically seeking virgin victims. The couple developed a calculated approach where Olivier's non-threatening appearance became their most effective weapon. She would approach potential victims with requests for help or directions, her maternal demeanor putting young people at ease before guiding them toward isolated locations where Fourniret would take control. They would drive through rural areas, sometimes with their own infant son in the vehicle, searching for opportunities. Once victims were isolated, Fourniret would sexually assault and kill them before burying their bodies in remote forest locations throughout the Ardennes region. In June 2003, a teenage girl managed to escape an attempted abduction and provided police with descriptions that led to Fourniret's arrest. Under interrogation, the facade of their relationship began to crumble. Olivier, faced with the reality of prosecution, began cooperating with authorities and revealing details about their years of crimes. Both received life sentences, with Fourniret dying in prison in 2021, while Olivier continues serving her term. Gwendolyn Graham and Cathy Wood met in 1986 while working as nurses' aides at the Alpine Manor nursing home in Walker, Michigan. Graham was 23 and had recently moved from Texas, while Wood was 25 and had been working at the facility for some time. Their relationship began as a friendship among co-workers, but quickly developed into a romantic partnership. Wood, who was married at the time, found herself drawn to Graham's more dominant personality. The nursing home environment, with its vulnerable elderly residents and often understaffed conditions, would provide the perfect setting for their crimes to go unnoticed for an extended period. Their killing spree began in early 1987 and continued for several months, during which they killed at least 5 elderly residents of the nursing home. Graham appeared to be the driving force behind the killings, claiming she wanted to experience the power of controlling life and death. Their method was relatively simple but effective, given their positions of trust and access. They would target residents who were particularly frail or had dementia, making it less likely that any resistance would be noticed or remembered by other staff members. The couple would smother their victims with towels or washcloths during their shift, often when other staff members were busy or absent from the area. What made their crimes particularly calculated was their attempt to spell out the word murder using the first letters of their victims' names. This plan demonstrated a level of premeditation and psychological satisfaction they derived from their actions. Wood initially participated reluctantly, but became more involved as their relationship intensified. Graham seemed to view the killings as a way to bond with Wood and prove their connection to each other. Their crimes were discovered when Wood, after their romantic relationship ended and Graham moved away, confided in her ex-husband about what they had done. Initially dismissed as fantasy, Wood's claims were eventually taken seriously by authorities who began investigating the unusually high number of deaths during Graham and Wood's shifts. Graham was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree killing and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Wood cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a plea deal and received a sentence of 20 to 40 years in prison. She was released on parole in 2020 after serving over 30 years. Martha Beck and Raymond Fernandez met through a correspondence club in 1947, where people seeking romance would exchange letters with potential partners. Beck, a 28-year-old nurse from Pensacola, Florida, was lonely and overweight, having struggled with relationships throughout her life. Fernandez was a 31-year-old con artist from New York who had been using Lonely Hearts advertisements to swindle women out of their money. When Fernandez traveled to Florida to meet Beck in person, he initially planned to rob her and disappear, but found himself genuinely attracted to her devotion and willingness to do anything for him. Their relationship quickly became obsessive and codependent, with Beck leaving her children and nursing job to join Fernandez in his criminal activities. Their killing spree began in 1948 after Beck discovered Fernandez's scheme of seducing and robbing women through personal advertisements. Rather than being horrified, Beck became jealous of the women Fernandez was courting and insisted on accompanying him to ensure no genuine romantic connections developed. Their method involved Fernandez posing as a Spanish lover seeking marriage, while Beck would pose as his sister to avoid suspicion. They would target middle-aged women who were financially comfortable but emotionally vulnerable, often widows or divorcees seeking companionship. The couple's approach became increasingly violent as Beck's jealousy intensified. Initially, they would simply rob their victims after Fernandez had gained their trust and access to their finances. However, when Beck felt threatened by any genuine affection between Fernandez and their targets, she would insist on eliminating the competition permanently. Their victims included Janet Faye, whom they beat to death with a hammer, and Delphine Downing and her young daughter, Raynell, whom they killed when Downing became suspicious of their true intentions. Beck seemed to derive satisfaction from asserting her dominance over these women, while Fernandez went along with the violence to maintain their partnership. Their downfall came in February 1949 when suspicious neighbors in Grand Rapids, Michigan, contacted police about the sudden disappearance of Delphine Downing and her daughter. When authorities searched the house where Beck and Fernandez had been staying, they discovered the bodies buried in the basement. Both Beck and Fernandez were convicted and sentenced to death. They were executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing Prison in New York in March 1951. Their case became known as the Lonely Hearts Killers. Erika and Benjamin Sifrit met while both were serving in the Navy in the late 1990s. Benjamin was a former Navy SEAL who had been discharged, while Erika was a dental hygienist in the Naval Service. Their relationship developed around shared interests in weapons, violence, and what they described as thrill-seeking behavior. After leaving the military, they married and settled in Altoona, Pennsylvania, where Benjamin worked as a mortgage broker and Erika continued her dental career. However, their seemingly normal suburban life masked a growing obsession with violence and a desire to experience what they called the ultimate rush of taking someone's life. Their killing spree occurred over Memorial Day weekend in 2002 during a vacation to Ocean City, Maryland. The couple had been staying at a luxury condominium and spending time at local bars and restaurants. On May 25th, they met Joshua Ford and Martha Crutchley, a young couple from Virginia who were also vacationing in the area. The Sifrits invited Ford and Crutchley back to their condominium, where they claimed they wanted to continue partying. What began as a social gathering quickly turned deadly when the Sifrits decided to act on their violent fantasies. Benjamin shot both Ford and Crutchley in their condominium, while Erika participated as an active accomplice. After the killings, the couple attempted to dispose of the evidence by dismembering the bodies and scattering the remains in various locations around Ocean City. They kept personal items from their victims as trophies, including Ford's driver's license, which Erika later carried in her purse. The couple seemed to treat the entire experience as a game or adventure, showing no remorse for their actions. Their capture came when authorities discovered personal belongings of the victims in a dumpster behind the condominium where the Sifrits had been staying. Security camera footage showed the couple disposing of evidence, and when police searched their room, they found blood evidence and additional personal items belonging to Ford and Crutchley. Benjamin was convicted of first-degree charges and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Erika was also convicted and received a life sentence plus 20 years. Thanks for watching, and if you found this video interesting, make sure to leave a like. If you would like a part 2, comment below your thoughts, and subscribe for more videos like this one. See you in the next one.